going to bring in we have a great guest on via Skype. We're going to bring in just a moment. But if you'd like to enter the discussion that we are about to have, 603-250-6007 is the studio line, 603-250-6007. You can also text me at 617-917-4476. I'm on social media at Matt Connarton. You can email me, matt@mattconnerton.com. You can interact and opine in the Facebook live chat, but the best thing to do so that we can hear and enjoy your dulcet tones is to give us a call at 603-250-6007. And we have Kevin Hammer via Skype. Kevin, are you there?
Yes, I am. Hello.
Welcome to the show.
Glad to be here. I just wanted to check. Can you hear me clearly?
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely. Can you hear me okay?
A bit choppy, a bit staticky, but I can make everything out. Every word you're saying.
Okay, good. Yeah, technology will not always be exactly what we want it to be. That's for sure.
Absolutely.
But yesterday we had a band on all the way from Germany called Factory of Art, and when you're getting transcontinental, it can be especially challenging. And they were Skyping in, but they had a little bit of a problem connecting. Eventually it worked, but had to give it a few shots. But where are you? Are you in Schenectady, New York?
Yes. Yep. I do reside in Schenectady, New York, which
Okay.
is not that far from the capital, Albany, New York.
Yeah. I have some family in New York State. Spent some time there as a kid because haven't been there in a while. Well, at least not in terms of spending any real time there. But my dad's second wife, her family is in. I don't know if you know Frankfurt. It's kind of near. I guess it's kind of near Utica.
Yeah, I'm aware of the Frankfurt area. Absolutely.
Okay, yeah, it's kind of funny in that area. You've got all those, they don't even really call them towns; they call them villages, like Frankfurt and Ilion, and it's hard to tell where one ends and another one begins. They're kind of like one city sort of matched together, but it's really like a series of neighborhoods. It's interesting, but
It's funny. Yeah, it is funny up here. I actually grew up in a community where the Amish had posts to tie up their horses. So yeah.
Really, no kidding. In New York, or were you?
Yes.
Oh wow. Oh, okay.
I was born and raised in Schoharie and Montgomery counties in New York State. And it's funny because most people, when you say you're from New York, they go to the city. But I grew up in small town, rural New York. Like I said, we had a Amish community, Mennonites. We had all that out there. And like I said, our bank, our the post office, our grocery store, they all had posts to tie up their horses. In fact, they put in a brand new, a few years ago, they put in a brand new sign in the center of town, buggy parking, horse buggy parking. So,
no kidding. Oh,
yep.
Oh, that's cool. That's interesting. You ever see that show, Amish Mafia? I think it was actually set in Pennsylvania. Did you ever see that? I think it was on the Learning Channel.
No, I'm aware that it exists, but no, I have actually never seen a full episode. I saw a trailer for it once, and I found it very amusing.
It's a trip. I know someone who claims to be a real New Yorker. From the city, who will often brag about the time that he interviewed Lebanon Levi from Amish Mafia, and it's kind of like, wow, that's quite the brag there. But yeah, that show, I have seen the show. It's kind of a trip. But now, what is your current status in terms of, are you a candidate or do you currently hold office?
Well, I am currently a candidate. I will admit I'm not going to speak so much to the the race right now, my campaign.
Yeah.
Right now, the Democrats. I am a Republican.
Mm-hmm.
The Democrats have their primary coming up. So we're just reaching out to the community right now, still knocking on doors, getting our names out there. I ran in 2021 for city council, and I'm running again.
Okay, in Schenectady?
Yep, in Schenectady.
Gotcha. Now, have you held office before, or have you run? Did you run for office prior to 2021?
No, 2021 was my first time entering politics in that fashion.
Okay.
Prior to that, I had been involved more on the activist side since probably around college.
Okay. And now you came to us by way of our friend Billy Painter, or Bad Billy, as he is as his online persona. Although personally, I don't know what you think, Kevin. I think he should just use his real name. I think Billy Painter is a cool name. I don't know why. I just like the way it sounds. But yeah, he had recommended, and I'm glad he connected us. And I didn't get a chance to see quite the whole thing, but I did watch most of your interview, Billy's interview with you, I should say, on Outlaw Radio, and very interesting. And you know, we had talked via Messenger, and you had mentioned you know, you're a Republican, but you know, you like to be able to discuss things with people outside of the echo chamber. And, you know, one of the things that I try to do with this show, and this is part of what made you interesting as a guest and why I think Billy suggested you come on is, you know, I'm an independent, but I would probably best describe my politics. And when I go with this particular description, people seem to agree with me. I'm center left, but with a heavy dose of libertarian in some ways too. But I really like talking to, you know, I don't personally enjoy having discussions that are strictly, you know, ideological, the sort of cable news, two people yelling at each other. You know, I like to dig deeper, and I like talking to people whom, you know, I mean, of course, it's nice to talk to people with whom I agree. It's also nice to talk to people with whom I disagree, and have a real discussion and an exchange of ideas. And my impression, both from Billy and what you had said on Messenger, is that you're very open to that as well, and that you like to address things outside the echo chamber. So I think that's very cool, and I'm very interested in. So a couple things about you that are interesting. Also, in addition to that I wanted to ask you about. One is I would like to hear your story about how Billy described you as a walk away from the Democratic Party, and you alluded to it a moment ago as well. That you used to be a Democrat, and it's interesting. You said something interesting in your conversation with Billy on his show. You were talking about how you really kind of feel more like an independent, but you know, the way the system works in New York, you know, if you want to vote, or I suppose if you want to be a candidate in your case, because you're an active candidate, you know, you're an active candidate, independents generally don't win. So, you know, you almost have to pick a side in that sense. But I do want to ask you more about all of that, your journey and how you've changed politically, or if you have changed. You know, sometimes people will say, regardless of which party they left, you know, I hear people say, well, the party didn't, you know, I didn't leave the party left me. But I'm curious to hear more about that. The other thing that's interesting about you is, so you are, and it's right on the website there that I was looking at, you know, you're openly gay, and in a party that I think there's a perception, and you might refute this today, I don't know, or it might be a concern. I'm curious to hear you address this. But there is a perception that the Republican Party today has kind of taken an anti-LGBTQ bent, but then again, I also realize you're in New York, and the Republican Party of New York State is not the same as, say, no disrespect to the South, but the Republican Party of Alabama, you know, so maybe where you are, and I suspect this is the case, but I'll be interested to hear you address this. Maybe where you are, it just doesn't matter. I mean, I know George Santos is an openly gay Republican, allegedly. Of course, you don't know whether you can believe anything he says, but he is an openly gay Republican from New York, and nobody seems to care that he's gay. So everyone's very interested in whether he's actually telling the truth about anything, but nobody seems to care that he's gay. So, you know, in the Northeast, maybe it's just not an issue. I don't know, but I'd be curious to get your perspective on that. But yeah, any of that you want to address. I know I threw a lot at you at once, but I'm very curious to learn more about you. And your conversation with Billy left me with a lot of questions. So as you can tell, so where
oh no, absolutely.
Yeah.
You threw a lot of ground at me.
Yeah.
You know, where to start on the map. No, no. Well, it is true. I was once I was a registered Democrat. I actually self-identified as a leftist at one point. You know, I was involved as an activist more during the time when SJW was more commonly used,
Okay.
social justice warrior. Back in those, you don't really hear that anymore. I had a journey which, I mean, there was a lot involved in it. and I came to embrace more of my conservative values. Now, part of that journey was indeed the fact, as you said, many people say, I didn't leave the party left me.
Hmm.
The Democratic Party went further to the left, that's true. However, at around the same time, I was also connecting to some more of my conservative root values that had always been there. So it really was a mixture. Um, I can't say that, now identifying as a conservative and speaking to conservative values, I can't say that they weren't there at all, right? They
Sure.
were there even when I was more on the left. It's just how my interactions went on the left ultimately led to me embracing more of those conservative values, and ultimately rejecting a lot of the ideology that I saw on the rise on the left. Now, it is true that, in regard, I like to say today, that I prefer to discuss values, not party.
Yes.
And that really has become more and more of my focus. Not too long ago, I was having a discussion with two gentlemen about issues locally. And as when we got done with our conversation, I was expressing my opinion. I was talking about specific issues. And when we got done with the conversation, and the one guy left, the other guy, who happens to be a Republican, a conservative like myself, he goes, "Wow," he goes, "that was impressive." He goes, "Usually when me and the other guy try to, me and my other friend try to talk to him, he's hard Democrat, and he will yell at us, get frustrated with us, and all that." And I go, "I understand that. And I've had that experience as well. But did you notice something in our conversation? Not once did I mention party affiliation. During this entire conversation, I just spoke about the issues and my personal values,
Well,
which,
yeah. Well, that
leaving party out of it, allowed us to have a better connection."
Yeah, that makes sense because when you had that conversation with Billy on his show, you were talking about that. There's a moment that I wanted to kind of mention this to you, and I liked what you had to say. There's a moment where you offered him some advice on, he was talking about his daughter and a political conversation interaction that he had with his daughter, and you said to Billy, "Can I give you some advice?" And the advice that you gave him, and I won't. I'm sure I won't get it out as eloquently as you put it, because I really liked what you had to say. But your suggestion was, start with, don't talk about political party with your daughter. Talk about specific issues and just stick to that. And I really, again, the way you said it was very, very good. I can't remember exactly how you put it, but it really resonated with me because, I feel like we live in a world where people are so hyper focused on party identification and ideology that there's no room to even express anything outside of what's expected to you. For example, on social media, if you are on either left or right, if you're a Republican and you say, "Well, I'm a Republican, but here's something that I do give President Biden credit for. I think he's right on, maybe, the way he's supplied weapons to Ukraine," or whatever, if that's something you happen to agree with him on. If you give Biden credit for anything as a Republican, you'll get dogpiled, you'll get called a rhino, you'll get called a socialist, whatever it is, right? And in the inverse, if you're a Democrat and you say, "Well, I don't like Trump, but I did agree with him on the debt ceiling. That was something that he got right." You'll get dogpiled by your fellow Democrats, and it's like, how can you dare say anything good about Trump? And and that just perpetuates. We live in a world where it's like you're expected to be locked in on one side or the other. And so I think your approach is smart. Talk about forget about the political identification. Start with the issues and go from there. Because at the end of the day, especially when you're talking about local things, I think there's a lot of room for agreement. You know, if you're running for city council or something like that, I think there's probably a lot more room for agreement and less room for ideology than there is on a broader scale anyway. So I think the way you approach it and the way you think about it, I think makes a lot of sense.
We've gotten to a point where if you're talking about a politician, whether they be Democrat, Republican, whatever they may be, and you are on that opposite end of the political spectrum, at least that's your party affiliation, and you do speak kind of to them in any way, you do get that attack. Unfortunately, we are that polarized.
Hmm.
Although I would say that we're polarized in regards to what the media highlights, in regards to what the politicians highlight, but not so much when it comes to day Americans, everyday Americans, who I feel actually can have more conversations. And I know, in fact, we can because I've taken part in those conversations.
Hmm.
It's more on the social media where I get the conflict, but in
Right.
person, I've had in-depth conversations with people on the opposite end of the political spectrum. Sure, we did not agree, but we remained civil, absolutely. And I think in part that's because and I had a friend once kind of put it this way. He was saying, it's kind of like we're at this point, say there was a historical a dictator, a monstrous dictator, right? And that dictator happened to say, puppies are cute. Well, after that point, no one could ever say puppies are cute because this dictator said it, right?
Right.
So no one can say puppies are cute now. So it's
Yeah.
very interesting that we have gotten into that, and it does exist on both sides of the aisle, all across the political spectrum. Now, for me personally, it's interesting because I look back to my roots and where I came from. One of the things I actually feel very fortunate in regards to is that I did not have very political parents.
Mm.
Um, my parents never discussed voting with me, to be honest. Some people may not look fondly upon that, for various reasons, but it's just not who my parents were. And
Okay.
I remember once asking them about voting, and both my parents had the same view. Why bother? They're all crooked anyways,
Really?
across the board. And that's a common view actually.
Yeah.
But for me, especially when I entered college, and I started looking at the world around me, I realized something that was true whether I liked it or not. There's the saying that you don't have to believe in the devil. All that matters is the devil believes in you. And that's true when it comes to politics. You can say you don't care about politics. You can say that you don't care, it doesn't impact your life, but that's just not true. I had a conversation with a friend who lives in a more rural area, and he was telling me earlier, he had been telling me in the week about he was putting in a duck pond and in a coop for the ducks and all that stuff. And then later on he was telling me how politics doesn't impact his life,
Mm.
so he just doesn't want anything to do with it. And I remembered back to our earlier conversation, and I asked him, knowing the answer probably, I said, I have a question. You think politics doesn't impact your life? I got a question. Did you check all the zoning laws and regulations when you put in that pond and you put in
Hmm.
that coop?
Hmm.
Because if you did not follow them to the T, those were passed. Those rules were passed by government, by local
Yep.
government. So yes, it does. And politics impacts us from the moment we are born and before. We were born, though, if you're born in a hospital, there are regulations, policies that the hospital has to follow that have been implemented by government. Government does impact us
Hmm.
from womb to tomb. And even
Hmm.
after the tomb, to be honest, because they can become, cemeteries. So, I mean, politics does impact you whether you like it or not. So once I
Yeah.
came to that realization when I entered college, I got involved, and at the time it was more on the left. I was an activist. I was a co-founder of one of the GSAs at my college. At the first college I went to, and I really did fall into more with the left. And for me, that did end up eventually taking more of an extreme turn at one point, to where I did cut out family over politics. Now, one
Really?
thing I never did, I never told anyone they didn't have a right to speak. This is where it honestly started to change for me. Is when I actually got that treatment in return, and I'm actually thankful that I did, to be honest. I started to question things on the left, at the time. And like I said, I don't say this to say that everyone who is leaning has these personality traits or takes part in this behavior.
Of course.
I'm speaking to the experience I had during my journey from the left to the right. And and I've met people on the right who are very big on, if you don't have this specific view, then you're cut off, right?
Hmm.
Nothing to do with you. But for me, I experienced it largely on the left, and still do to this day. Um, what had happened was, I think, as I always I always kind of say, I think what really ultimately was going to result in my conflict with the left was that I'm very stubborn,
Hmm.
and I don't respond well to people trying to put me in my place. I'm someone who
Yeah.
always asks questions.
Yeah.
I wasn't the child who easily accepted when my parents told me something. I wasn't the child to really accept because I said so. I was the child who would ask why.
Yeah.
And I view that as important. You tell a child not to touch a burning stove, why not explain to them why they shouldn't touch the hot stove, because
Right.
they could get hurt, instead of just saying because I said so.
Right. Right.
They're more likely to rebel against that and actually touch the stove and get burnt. But if you explain to them why, you're gonna probably have a different result. I mean, they could still do it,
Right.
but but you're probably gonna, at least they're gonna have a better understanding. And I really had that personality from the time I was very young. Trust me, it frustrated my mother at times, but
Yeah.
my mother understood where my logic was going. And ultimately, I think this personality trait is what eventually caused me to conflict with the left as it moved further and further to the left. Because when I entered the left, there was a lot of things that were preached that I absolutely believed in, and still do actually believe in to this day. It's just when I noticed a lot of double standards and hypocrisy on the rise, that was when I started to conflict, because I started to ask more questions.
Yeah.
Um, and I do have a few examples of those that I found, where I was starting to, like, for example, there was this, we would say, all right, you shouldn't judge someone by the color of their skin. Absolutely. Absolutely, you shouldn't.
Hmm.
That's wrong. That's racist. To have a prejudice against someone based on the color of their skin, that is racism. That is the definition of racism, right? It's wrong to judge someone's entire character based on their sex. Absolutely. Absolutely agreed with that, and
Hmm.
I still agree with that, deeply.
Yes.
It's wrong to judge someone, hate someone based on their sexual orientation, and in regards homosexuality, heterosexual. I still believe that.
Sure.
However, I noticed that there became more and more among my friends this double standard, meaning they believed that racism only went one way, sexism only went one way, hating someone based on sexual orientation only went one way, and that if you were the oppressed, quote unquote, demographic, you had every right to treat other people however you wanted based on these characteristics, because you were the oppressed. And that just didn't sit right with me. I think that it's just as wrong for me to attack a heterosexual man for being heterosexual, to call him some kind of name, a slur related to that, as it would be for him to call me a slur in regards to my sexual orientation. I saw that as just as wrong. But unfortunately, on the progressive left right now, they don't see that, as they see one as wrong, but not the other.
Um, but where were there personal experiences that you had where this came up? Because I mean, well, first of all, let me just say, so I fundamentally agree with you. I mean, anybody, being prejudiced against anyone is a form of prejudice. Like, I'm not a big fan of the term, and you might agree, I'm not a big fan of the term reverse racism. I think
No, 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 no.
racism
It's
is
just
racism.
racism.
Yeah, yeah.
Yep.
But I am curious. So, I mean, were there personal experiences that you were having, or did something happen to you online where you began to notice? Because I don't feel like I see. While I agree with you in principle, I haven't. Granted, I don't really engage much online in politics. I kind of save it all for the show. But I agree with you in principle, but it's not something I've seen. Like, I can't off the top of my head think of a lot of examples of straight people being attacked for being straight. I'm not sure. So I'm just, can you clarify that a little bit? I'm just curious where you were running into that, and if you can walk us through how you responded to that when you encountered it, and how that drew you to see hypocrisy and double standards and so forth.
Well, I guess let me explain, because I know the perspective you're coming from. In my personal life, when I say I was an activist, well, I may not have, been high up there and gotten a lot of attention. I was very much involved in activism.
Hmm.
And I did end up with friends who went further and further to the left, like not just people on social media, people in my circle of friends who, for example, over a political disagreement, one friend I had, he did try to get someone fired from their job. He tried,
Oh,
he doxed them. Like, I knew people who honestly were at that level of encouraging people to cut off family, even divorce their spouses over political disagreements. Like,
yeah,
my circle of friends went hard left. So it wasn't even social media, which, don't get me wrong, I experienced that on social media. Of course,
yeah,
I was part of a lot of left leaning political groups and chats and everything like that.
yeah.
But I had people in my life, people I had known for years, who were also of this mentality and actually took part in these actions. And like, when I had the falling out with my family member over politics, a lot of my friends encouraged me to cut her out of my life and never talk to her again. And this was someone who is my baby cousin. I'm about 4 years older than her, and I was there when she was born.
Hmm.
And we had a falling out over politics, and at the time I was much more extreme and much more of, that you got to agree with me on this or else I don't want to talk to you. And I was surrounded by people who had that same mentality and encouraged that mentality in me. Now, I still made the decision, right? I'm
Yeah.
not no one held a gun to my head or anything. um but not to say that someone wouldn't do that these days. It seems like some might, but no, I still made that decision. So I still take responsibility for my actions there. I'm not going to sit here and claim that I was completely helpless. I was forced to, by threat of my life or anything. I ultimately was the one that made those decisions. But so that was my circle of friends.
Sure.
Just to clarify,
Yeah.
is I actually marched on Washington D.C. I protested outside my capital. I went to organizational meetings. I helped organize protests. I spoke at protests. I was deeply involved in regards to the activity locally when it came to the left.
Yeah. Yeah. I will actually, I want to kind of retract and rephrase something I said. When you mentioned specifically people trying to get people fired from their jobs, or because of maybe not, whatever it is, their position or something. I have seen examples of that, actually. So I was not, I'm realizing now, because as you're talking, I'm thinking of specific things, where, it kind of reminds me of what Candace Owens talked about. Although I don't believe her story. I do believe your story, because I've seen examples of what you're talking about. I have, and it's starting to come back to me. Candace, I don't know how you feel about her. I don't believe her. But that's a separate conversation. But I know what you're saying, and it's yeah. If somebody somebody does something that someone perceives as, and they may be right in their perception that it's prejudice or something, and then they go and they try to get that person fired from their job, that type of thing. Yeah, I don't like to see that either. I think people do go much too far with that, or the doxing that goes on, and so I understand you're being repelled by that. I've never been an activist in that way, so I've not experienced that, but I've never been in that position either. But I have seen that kind of thing happen, Kevin. So I do get where you're coming from on that.
And let me just, because you asked for specific examples.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
there were specific examples, especially around 2016 going into 2017, because obviously that's when things really heated up.
yeah.
And that was when, I cut out a family member, but then I started to really question myself on that. I over politics was going to cut out someone that I had known literally since the day she was born,
Yeah.
over politics. I had a falling out with, my in-laws eventually for a little bit. And I don't regret. Some people might say they regret these falling outs. I don't, because I stepped back and reflected on them, and more I became critical of myself. What could I have done differently?
Hmm.
What could I have said differently?
Yeah.
And some of the things that happened personally where I actually became a target in my circle of friends it started around that time. So I don't know if you recall when a group of four young individuals who happened to be black kidnapped a young man with mental health issues and tortured him and recorded it.
Th-
And we're calling and we're using racial slurs and towards whites during that. I remember in my group of friends saying, "Oh, okay, here's an act of racism, just as we've called out acts of racism against other demographics, other racial demographics. Here's an act of racism that we should call out as well." Like I said, in my mind, racism is racism and
right.
it's wrong and we should call it out. But when I went to call that out, people in my own circle of friends said, "No, you can't do that. That's not racism." Was that a violent act? Yes. Was that prejudice? Yes. And I'm like, prejudice is in the definition of racism, but I started getting pushback with that. Another thing that happened to me is I had made a lot of posts critical of Christianity in regards to, well, the LGBT community. And I had made a number of posts, and my friends in my close circle, they had liked and shared them.
Hmm.
Well, I made a similar post, except this post I was being critical of Islam in regards to how that religion has treated homosexuals and other people from the community over a span of years. And I was told I should take down that post because my posts against Christianity were fine, but my posts being critical of Islam were wrong because in the context of America, we're talking about a minority demographic, so I'm punching down. And this just didn't make sense to me. I realized the biggest issue I had was inconsistency in
Hmm.
logic.
Hmm.
If you have a specific set of values and you don't apply them equally across the board, I have to question you. I have to question if and you can, and then you don't acknowledge the double standards, the hypocrisy at play in your own mind. Don't get me wrong, we all have our double standards
Oh
to a
yeah.
degree, right? Like,
Yeah,
I
of
will admit,
course.
when it comes to policy, like there are things that yes, children shouldn't do, but adults can, right? That's one case where absolutely, and to me, that's legitimate. I stand by that. But this was very different. And more I started speaking on issues and getting told to be quiet by
Mm.
those in my circle of friends to the point where I was actually removed from several uh, messaging groups that I had been part of on social media where I actually knew the people in person. And then one individual, it was amusing, the one that tried to get a guy fired from his job.
Yeah.
There was a protest locally in front of my police station actually. And this I had already been started being very open about my criticisms of the left, and I had started to embrace more of my conservative values in part as a result of that, started reflecting more upon who I really am, really soul searching. But during that time, I hadn't heard from him as much.
Yeah.
I happened to go to that protest. I saw him there. He kind of looked at me, then looked away. And this is
Ugh.
someone I had been at his house. I had celebrated with him, celebrated birthdays. Like, really, we had hung out. And sure enough, I went to look him up on social media. Not only had he unfriended me on social media, he had blocked me as well.
Yeah.
So this is what started to happen, and one I think one big issue for me was my unwavering belief in free speech.
Hmm.
No matter what, even at my days when I was the furthest to the left I had ever gotten, I still, while I might cut people out, I might have cut people out, I
Sure.
still didn't believe that they should be silenced.
Right.
I
Right.
still believed that they had a right to speak to their values, to what they believed, even if their values hurt my feelings. I just wouldn't associate with them if it hurt my feelings. But I believed that to my core, and I still do. So when a number of my friends started taking those actions of, well, we're going to work to get people fired, we're going to even, dox people, release their information,
Yeah.
and even sometimes go after family members,
Oh,
all
yeah.
because people were just speaking their values, that for me was like, I'm done. I have to step away from this. And that was when my journey really started to where I am today.
Yeah, yeah. No, I can understand all of that. And now I'm curious. The other aspect that I'm really interested in. So, is my theory correct, Kevin, that you as an openly gay man in the Republican Party in the state of New York probably not an issue, or have you run into any problems with that where maybe somebody just gives you a hard time?
So I'm not someone who tries to blind myself to reality or tries to deny truth. Of course, the Republican Party has not had a history that has been great with individuals who, like myself, are gay, right?
Yeah, yeah.
That's a fact. Then again, it wasn't too long ago that you had Biden up there talking about marriage being between a man and a woman. So, but furthermore, I want to I put it this way now with people, because people do say to me, how can you vote this way? How can you have these values when the party that you're a part of um has had this history when it comes to the LGBT community? Well, I'm like, well, first of all, there's a great deal in the LGBT community that I stand firmly against. What I see, especially in the current LGBTQ all the way to Z, sorry, community, that I absolutely am adamantly against. So first of all, there's that, and second of all, even if, let's say, the Republican Party today put out a platform that all homosexuals should be put to death, right? Even if that were to happen today, my values on freedom of speech, the First Amendment would be the same. The Second Amendment would be the same. Abortion would be the same. Border issues would be the same. I would still have these values. So would I vote for a politician that wanted me put to death? No, but I would vote for a politician that fought for the values that I preach. And yes, they happen to be conservative and Republican. Um, and that's just the fact. So when people try to bring up the history, I'm like, well, that's also the point. It's history, right?
Yeah.
Because we can spend all day going down history, going down that road as to who did what and who did when. I mean, do you want to go back to segregation? Do you want to go back to Democratic Party? I mean, how far do you want to take this?
Well,
And
yeah.
yeah.
No, I understand that. But what I'm curious though, Kevin, is do you get any pushback? You know, you're a candidate for office as a Republican. Do you get any pushback in your own party in New York? Because if you look at the Republican Party's history with, say, for example, marriage equality, obviously there are Republicans. Well, I'll just give you just a quick example. So here in New Hampshire, we were actually ahead of the curve on marriage equality because Jenny was serving in the House in the legislature here in New Hampshire at the time. But there were a large contingent of Republicans in New Hampshire who voted in favor of marriage equality and then voted against repealing it when some Republicans tried to repeal it in the next term. So we were ahead of the curve, but part of what contributed to that was some Republicans who said, no, let's go ahead and do this. Not all of them, of course, plenty of them opposed it as well, but and there are certainly Republicans who bristle at the idea of undoing that, for example. So there are a lot of Republicans who are pro-marriage equality, but I'm just wondering, I mean, do you run into any fellow Republicans or Republicans you've campaigned with, for example, who have any issue? Again, I wouldn't think that it would be a problem in New York, not to, bring Northeastern elitism into it, but we're both Northeasterners, we can do that. Whereas, if you were running for city council in Alabama or Mississippi or Oklahoma, as a Republican, you might very well, you might run into some trouble. But I'm wondering, have you had any of that here? Or has that part been pretty smooth? Because to your credit, you don't try to hide it. Again, the website I was looking at, you could try to slide one by and refer to your partner on that website, but you don't. You refer to him as your husband. If you had said partner and kept it ambiguous, you might fool some people, but you're not trying to fool anybody, which I really respect you for. Because of the position that you're in, no one could blame you if you did try to sneak one by. You know what I mean? So,
So it's interesting. I guess first of all, it's a matter of my approach, right?
yeah,
Is to me, there's nothing special in that I do reference my husband in my description. I've seen plenty of profiles where, a male candidate will say my wife in regards to explaining why he's running for office. My wife, my family, I'm running because I want my family to have to live in a safer community. And that's the thing is, first of all, I want to stress,
yeah,
I am not a gay candidate. I am not a gay Republican. I am a Republican candidate who happens to be gay, who happens to be
right,
a homosexual. So
right,
gay is not the priority of my identity.
yeah,
It's not something I put any work into. It's something I just am.
yeah,
So that's also the idea of taking pride in that. To me, one of the things is taking pride in an identity that you didn't work for. That's where you get into narcissism and you get into more entitlement. So for me, when I go to speak to a Republican on the street, or I knock on their door, I don't introduce myself as, hi, I'm Kevin the homosexual.
right,
I introduce myself as, hi, my name is Kevin Hammer. I'm running for city council. These are the issues that I'm focusing on, and that's where the conversation is.
yeah,
Have I interacted with any pushback? Yeah, I've interacted, but to me, it's no different. So I have dealt with Republicans. I do have an example of one Republican who couldn't get past the fact that I happen
oh,
to be a homosexual man. But at the same time, I I have people on the left who can't get past the fact that I'm a homosexual who's a Republican. So
yeah,
I witness it on both sides. Now, in regards to
interesting,
marriage equality specifically,
yeah,
I was involved as an activist during that time. I actually marched on Washington, D.C. for the Equality March in 2009. Um, so yeah, yes, it was 2009, I believe. So I was involved
yeah,
in that. But to be honest, my view even on that to a degree has changed in regards to what I personally was fighting for is I wanted legal protections.
hmm,
I wanted to be able to live my life with with a man that I fell in love with and not have to worry about my family or anyone else coming in
right,
during certain times. Say I was injured and in the hospital, I didn't want to worry about my family coming in and laying claim to me. I
right,
didn't want to worry about if I were to pass away, my spouse, being able to inherit what I leave him in my will. I didn't want to worry about that. Now, a lot of people say, well, you could still follow those, the legal processes and leave. Well, the problem is that there was a history of when we didn't have those legal protections, that even if someone said, okay, I'm going to sign off that this person makes all medical decisions for me if I'm incapacitated, or that my items go to this, families would often come in, and there was a history of this, and challenge it on the basis of morality, and even say, well, we feel that our relative was brainwashed into this lifestyle
yeah,
and therefore we want custody, we want a right to him to make the decisions about his health, or we want a right to his estate. And if a judge if a judge's morality was in line with that family, quite often it didn't matter if there was a will. It didn't
Right.
matter if anything was on paper, the judge would go with that. So for me, it wasn't about even the word marriage. I just wanted security in the fact that there were legal
Hmm.
protections for me and the man that I love.
Yeah, that's a big part of why civil unions, in my view, that wasn't enough. That was sort of the compromise when civil unions came in, and it was like, well, but as you know, some of the examples that you gave are reasons why even civil unions didn't quite hold up, and that's one of the reasons why it was so important in my view. I've like I said, I've always been pro marriage equality. But Kevin, you've been very generous with your time. We're already it's about 10 minutes of 5, so we'll let you go. I know you got to get to dinner and so forth. But not to put you on the spot, but I would like to do this again soon because I've really enjoyed the conversation, and I feel like we barely scratched the surface. And you're an interesting guy. So I do hope we can do this again soon. But before we let you go, please, is there anything that we should know for anyone who might be listening online in your area, where they should go to learn more about your campaign or social media or anything you want to make sure our listeners know about, or anything that you might be involved in online, politically or otherwise, that people should know about?
Well, I mean, for in regards to my campaign, where you can learn more about me and also my other amazing candidates who are running alongside me, I really do have some great people surrounding me. You on Facebook, you can go to your GOP candidates for Schenectady City Council. It is actually the same on Twitter. Um, there you can find links to our website and just learn more about us. But ultimately, I guess what I want to leave people with is just to really work on avoiding the echo chambers that we have
Hmm.
today in our society, regardless of whether they are on the right or the left. Echo chambers, I truly believe, are one of the greatest dangers in our society today. We Once you get trapped in them, you get this mentality to actually hate the other side.
Yes.
And the scary thing about that is once you convince yourself to hate someone, to hate a group of people, history shows us that eventually you can justify doing the most horrific things to those individuals. So get out of your echo chambers if you're in it. Think about your life for a moment. Say, do I have a friend, not an acquaintance? Do I have a friend or someone that I can have deeper conversations with who's of a different perspective on this issue or that issue or a different political affiliation? And do we have these conversations? If not, work on changing that. Work
Hmm.
on making connections because like I said, it's the politicians, it's the media, it's the hardcore activists that are creating this view that we are so divided that we can't stand each other. But on the streets, I feel that we very much still can have conversations.
Oh yeah, and people treat each other differently in person than they do on social media anyway.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. And
So
by the way, I would love to come back on. I'm very much enjoying this conversation. And you're right. Overall, the topics in general, we've just barely scratched the surface.
yeah.
Because I've definitely had an interesting journey from left to right, and my walk away experience as well.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Well, we'll set something up. Jenny will connect with you on that, and we'll make it happen because I've enjoyed this very much. All right, Kevin Hammer, thank you again so much for joining us today, and we will talk soon.
Soon. Have a good
All
day.
right, you too. Bye bye. All right, very good. That was Kevin Hammer, a Republican from Schenectady, New York. He is on the ballot for, well, I don't know if there's a ballot yet, but he's running for city council there in Schenectady. And yeah, and really like what he had to say about, getting out of the echo chambers, because that's part of the reason why I wanted to talk with him today, is because that's something that we talk about a lot on this show. And I really believe that, in fact, we were talking just the other day about algorithms, and how on social media, whether it be YouTube or Facebook or whatever it is, you're actively served up content that matches what you've already looked at, what you've already absorbed. So you're constantly being fed information that reinforces what you already think. And that's good in one sense, right? From a customer service standpoint, because you want to be suggested, so to speak, products or services or content that you are going to be interested in. So, it's no different than on social media in terms of content. It's no different from when, say, you're shopping on Amazon. You want to be presented with products that somehow align with things that you've previously purchased or things that you've previously looked at. So that all makes sense. So the algorithms are a necessary evil, but the evil part in the necessary evil is that, it does reinforce these echo chambers that we all get trapped in and that we're vulnerable to. And if you can have constructive intellectual discussions outside of that and outside of being, trapped in an ideology. And Kevin put it very well when he said what happens is that gets reinforced to the point where people who disagree with each other begin to hate each other. And that's the worst part. And a lot of terrible things become justified because of that hatred. So, yeah, so there you go. Like I said, I feel like we barely scratched the surface with Kevin, so we will do that again soon.